So, The Sandman really snuck up on me. I legit forgot it was coming out until the day it dropped. It might also be the best thing DC has put their name on in years. How's it going, everybody? I'm Red Muffler Man, and once again, I've been dragged out into the content mines for your enjoyment. Today, we need to talk about Netflix's, DC Comics', Vertigo's, Neil Gaiman's The Sandman. And oh boy, do I have stuff to say about this show. The first being that I'm actually surprised the show even exists at all. For those that don't know, Sandman has a very troubled history in terms of adaptations. There were attempts to get Sandman made into a movie starting all the way back in 1991. And then every attempt to get it adapted ended up in production hell. For all intents and purposes, Sandman seemed like a cursed property that would never get a fully realized adaptation. But then, here comes Netflix. Hey Neil, want to make an adaptation of your beloved 1990s cult comic sensation? Yes. Yes, that sounds lovely. Excellent. I will now proceed to cancel Bone. Again. Maybe one day. But yeah, getting into the show itself, the first thing I want to touch on here are some of the differences between the comic and the adaptation. And one of the first things that comes to my attention was the general scrubbing of most of the DC mainstays. You see, Sandman originally was set somewhat heavy-handedly in the DC universe. In fact, Sandman himself started as a forgotten DC hero that Neil wanted to reboot. But from the get-go, one of the first storylines of Sandman saw Dream referencing the existence of Superman, and in another, immediately crossing paths with Scott Free and Martian Manhunter. When Dream goes to visit Lucifer Morningstar in Hell, in the comics he's greeted by Etrigan, a demon synonymous with the DC universe created by Jack Kirby. But in the adaptation, the demon is just some dude. And for the most part, every crossover element from the original comics has mostly been scrubbed, with the exception of Static Shock. So yeah, this was a pleasant surprise for me, honestly, seeing Jed in the last arc of the show randomly wearing a Static Shock t-shirt. Granted, that surprise quickly went to the wayside once he realized he's being abandoned by his mother due to parental custody issues. But it's fine, because then you cut to Jed at Serial Killer Con, watching a full episode of Static Shock in the hotel room TV. So yeah, the show either has no continuity in the greater DC universe, or we live in a hellscape where the day-to-day lives of these superheroes have been flanderized and produced into Saturday morning cartoon shows. Oh shit, I love the boys! But yeah, jokes aside, I'm pretty happy with the show not having to deal with any of the continuity garbage in any other present universe. The show gave Neil and the team a chance to really stretch their legs with what the Sandman is. And that extra freedom shows with how much fun they got to have with this adaptation. And on that topic, the Sandman goes to incredible lengths to pay homage to the original illustrations found in the books. Many of the shots are ripped almost verbatim and recreated in full live action. One great example being Dream. Once he finally manages to escape his glass prison and confronts Alex, he's almost fully blacked out, with the exception of his ominous, glowing, white eyes. I saw that and all I could say to myself was, why? Why can't Sandman's contemporaries have this kind of stylistic eye? It's honestly a breath of fresh air from the drab grays and washed out palettes I've been assaulted with lately from a good chunk of DC and MCU films. Sandman, while it tends to keep a lot of its shots very dark to match the style of the comic, a lot of scenes also tend to be lit with very bright splashes of colored light. And this adds a lot of vibrancy to what would normally just be a dark and muddy mess. And it really helps the show stand apart visually, despite some spotty CGI. Oh, those gargoyles. But to my next point, we move on to The Sandman Goes to Hell! And this scene differs pretty hard from the one we got in the comics. The setup is roughly the same. Dream is in search of his helmet, and after learning it's been traded to a demon, he journeys to Hell to have an audience with Lucifer Morningstar. Lucifer brings forward the demon Coronzon, who has the helmet. Dream and Coronzon must now do battle in order to decide who will get the helmet. In the Netflix adaptation, each side names a champion. Dream naming himself, and Coronzon naming Lucifer to be his champion, cause yeah, that's fair. What proceeds is a psychic battle where Dream and Lucifer are challenging their wits, worldviews, and realities in a grandiose struggle that sees Dream on the brink of death, while Patton Oswalt cries to the heavens asking, why? Only for Dream to fight back with the power of hope, winning against Lucifer and taking back the helmet in what I can only describe as an emotional spectacle. It was super cool. Oh, it was so cool. But then you have the comic. which sees Koronzon not being a little bitch and actually fighting his own battles. But we don't get a big emotional fight with big epic music. No. It's actually an improv stage show. The entire scene is really playful. Koronzon appears with a suit, and the two start throwing reality-bending soliloquy towards one another in front of a live studio audience. I'd expect this type of shit at a burlesque show, not hell. And then to top it all off, Dream is just casually dropping bars, dressed up like a blues brother, and he is demolishing this demon jobber without a second thought. There's no struggle. This dude is just dying. If anything, I'm actually kind of sad we didn't get this version of the scene. It shows off Dream in a more playful light, where even if he's deadpan, you can tell he's still very quirky. And it's kind of a shame. Granted, we still get to see a big part of him being a quirky little dork. I love Dream. He's a huge dork. But then we have what I think is the best part of Sandman, and that is John D., the antagonist of the first arc. And for those that don't know, John in the comics initially started off as a supervillain named Dr. Destiny. Hey, yo, that name goes kind of hard, though. He'd come into possession of Dream's ruby after Dream was forcefully abducted and proceeded to use said ruby to wreak absolute havoc on the planet. But the more he used the ruby, the more it wore down on his sanity. Eventually, he ended up being confined to Arkham Asylum. However, he escapes and, using the ruby once again, wreaks havoc until he's finally put away by the combined efforts of Dream and the JLA. In the comic, John D comes off as someone who may have been good at one point, but has lost all meaning in pretty much anything that they do because they're, crazy. John in the show, however, has a certain warmth. It shows in almost every aspect of his character, from his mother sacrificing her life to make sure that he's safe as he's crying over her dead body, begging her to stop. John warning his victims not to attack him lest they hurt themselves. You can tell by speaking with John that he's not well, but he still shows a shred of humanity, no matter how dark his actions may be. And the best example I feel is comparing how he handles Rosemary in the comics versus the show. For those that don't know, Rosemary was the person that happened to pick up John while he was hitchhiking back to his house, and very unfortunate for her. Rosemary in the comics remains oblivious to John's true nature throughout her driving him around. She speaks with John, who vents to her about his problems, and the two seem to get close to one another. Then once they arrive, John just casually shoots Rosemary and takes the Ruby of Dream. Any sort of remorse was left at the door a long time ago. But then we get the same scene in the show. Rosemary knows that John is not well. She's seen him kill someone, and for all intents and purposes, she's John's hostage. She drives John to his old house for him to pick up the ruby, just like in the comic. At this point, I fully expected John to blow her brains out and move on being this full-on unforgivable villain. He tells her that good people tend to not be able to protect themselves, and he gives her the amulet of protection that his mother gave to him, to make sure that the person who helped him, despite fearing for her life, was going to live the rest of her life in safety. This trend continues in the episode 24/7. In the comics, John uses the ruby to manipulate people at a local diner, making their lives hell for no other reason other than it's just something entertaining for him. But in the show, John has this childlike obsession with the truth. He wants to live in a world where lies are something that simply do not exist, and everyone can truly connect with one another. John idolizes this perfect place where people don't have to suffer the deceit that he had to go through that ruined his entire life. And while this leads to the tragic slaughter of the people in the diner, John was coming from a place of wanting to do what he felt was right. He wants to live in a world of truth, even if that truth is ugly, even if that truth hurts people. And that childlike obsession makes him a far more interesting villain than his original appearance in the comics. It feels grounded, sincere, and I think that's why I like the Sandman as much as I do. This is a quote in the final episode that perfectly encapsulates my feelings on this show. Humanity is far more vivid to us than any marvels of power. Sometimes to tell a compelling story, it's not about displaying incredible feats of strength or power. It's not about how good your CGI gargoyles are, how clean your penciling is in a comic, or how much budget you have for special effects. Sometimes it's enough to sit down and tell the story of what it means to be a human, to put pen to paper and let those sincere thoughts out. And that's all I have to say about Sandman. It's great. I can't recommend it enough. Please watch it. And feel free to drop your thoughts on the Sandman in the comments below. I want to thank Rob once again for letting me gush about this cool little show. And if you like what we do, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. And if you like me, I'm on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at Red Muffler Man. And yeah, have a good one, everybody. Take it easy.